The rain in London didn't just fall, it wept. It clung to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like 1,000 transparent ghosts. Inside, the air smelled of expensive sandalwood and the faint metallic tang of champagne. Elena stood by the glass, her silk dress the color of a bruised plum. She was waiting for Julian. Julian Thorne was a man made of sharp edges and soft promises. A titan of the financial world, he moved through life with the grace of a panther. When he proposed to Elena 2 years ago, he didn't just offer a ring, he offered a sanctuary. Elena, an orphan who had built a small but respected art restoration business, thought she had finally found home. "You are my masterpiece, Elena," he would whisper, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "The only thing in this world I haven't bought, because you are priceless." But tonight, the silence in the penthouse was different. It was heavy. Elena held a manila envelope in her trembling hands, an anonymous gift left at her gallery. Inside weren't photos of an affair. That would have been too simple. Inside were bank records, forged signatures, and a legal contract that effectively transferred every asset of her family's ancestral estate. The only thing her parents had left her, into a shell company owned by Julian. He hadn't just loved her. He had harvested her. The door chimed. Julian walked in, shedding his drenched overcoat. He looked tired, yet triumphant. He walked over to Elena, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She flinched as if his hand were a hot iron. "Elena, what's wrong?" His voice was smooth, a practiced instrument of comfort. She threw the envelope onto the marble coffee table. The papers spilled out like dry leaves. Julian's eyes flicked down. For a split second, a heartbeat, his mask slipped. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating void. Then, the mask returned, but it was crooked. "I can explain," he said, but he didn't move to hug her. "Explain which part, Julian? The part where you spent 6 months courting me just to get my signature on the power of attorney? Or the part where you're planning to bulldoze my father's gallery to build a luxury hotel?" Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. The fire was starting to burn away the tears. Julian sighed, a sound of genuine annoyance. He poured himself a drink. "It was business, Elena. The estate was drowning in debt you didn't even know about. I saved it. I just redirected the ownership to ensure its growth. You have your life here. You have me. Why does a pile of old bricks in the countryside matter?" "Because it was my soul," she whispered, "and you traded it for a hotel." "Don't be dramatic," Julian snapped. "You're an artist. You live in dreams. I live in the real world. You'll get over it. We're getting married in 3 weeks. Think of the life we'll have." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the man who loved her. He was a predator who had found a beautiful prey. "There is no us, Julian. Not anymore." Julian laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Go then. Walk out. But remember, Elena, you have nothing. No gallery, no money, no home. You sign the final waiver tonight, or I'll ensure your reputation in the art world is so blackened you won't be able to paint a fence, let alone restore a Caravaggio." That night, Elena didn't leave. She stayed. She signed the papers. She let him think he had won. But as she watched him sleep, her heart didn't break. It turned into a diamond, hard, clear, and capable of cutting glass. 3 years passed. Julian Thorne was now the king of the city. His hotel, the Thorne Plaza, stood where Elena's childhood memories once breathed. He was engaged again, this time to the daughter of a shipping magnate. He had forgotten Elena. To him, she was just a ghost he had successfully exorcised. But ghosts don't stay dead. They just wait for the right medium to speak through. Elena had vanished into the shadows of Europe. She didn't cry in cafes. She worked. She used the last of her hidden savings to study the one thing Julian respected: the mechanics of ruin. She learned about offshore accounts, hostile takeovers, and the delicate art of the long con. Most importantly, she changed her name. She became Ava Sterling, a mysterious high-stakes art consultant with a reputation for finding the unfindable. She spent 3 years building a spider web, and Julian was the fly she had been feeding. The anniversary gala for the Thorne Plaza was the event of the season. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and silk. Julian stood at the center, glowing with the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. A woman entered the room. She wore a dress of shimmering silver scales that looked like armor. Her hair, once soft and brown, was now a sharp platinum blonde bob. Her eyes were chips of ice. It was Ava Sterling. Julian felt a strange tug in his chest, a flicker of recognition buried under 3 years of greed. He approached her. "Miss Sterling, I've heard you are the woman who can find a lost Da Vinci in a basement." "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr. She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. "I don't just find things. I restore them to their rightful owners." "A noble pursuit," Julian smirked. "And what brings you to my hotel?" "I have a gift for you," she said, handing him a tablet. "A private auction. The heart of the estate collection. Pieces I believe you've been looking for to complete your penthouse gallery." Julian looked at the screen. His breath hitched. They were the original sketches from Elena's father's gallery, pieces he thought had been destroyed in the accidental fire during construction. If he had these, his collection would be the most valuable in the country. He had to have them. Over the next month, Ava led Julian down a path of obsession. She convinced him to liquidate his liquid assets to buy the collection through a private, untraceable digital vault. She used his own greed against him. He was so blinded by the prize that he didn't notice the legal loopholes in the contracts she prepared. He didn't notice that the shell companies he was sending his millions to were connected to a dormant account, the Elena Vance Foundation. The night of the final transfer, Julian was alone in his office at the top of the hotel. He clicked, "Confirm." He waited for the digital certificates of ownership to appear. Instead, his screen went black. Then, a video began to play. It was the penthouse security footage from 3 years ago. The night he had threatened Elena. The night he had admitted to the fraud. Elena had hidden a camera in a sculpture he never looked at. A phone rang on his desk. He answered it, his hands shaking. "Do you like the sketches, Julian?" Elena's voice was no longer a purr. It was a blade. "Elena, you can't do this. I'll have you arrested for fraud." That money was never yours, Julian," she interrupted. "It was the value of my father's gallery, adjusted for 3 years of interest and the emotional tax you owed me. The contracts you just signed, they weren't for art. They were a full confession of your original fraud, tied to an automatic blast email to the SEC and your board of directors." "I'll destroy you," he screamed, slamming his fist on the desk. "You already tried," she said calmly. "Look out your window, Julian." Below, blue and red lights began to swirl. The police were arriving. Not for a robbery, but for him. The evidence of his 3-year-old crime, combined with the new financial irregularities she had engineered, was a velvet noose. "You told me once that you live in the real world and I live in dreams," Elena said, her voice fading. "Tonight, the real world is coming for you. And me. I'm going back to the countryside. I'm going to rebuild the gallery. I'm going to plant roses where you poured concrete." "Wait," Julian pleaded. "Goodbye, Julian. Don't worry about the hotel. I've already sold it to a non-profit. It's going to be an art school for orphans. I think my father would have liked that." The line went dead. In the silence of the office, Julian looked at his hands. They were empty. He had spent his life building a throne of glass, only to realize that the woman he had betrayed was the only one who knew how to make it shatter. Outside, the rain in London began to fall, but for Eleanor, for the first time in years, the sun was about to rise.